This is High Tea and On the Path series, providing weekly insights and inspirations from the people who move food and beverage culture. This week's High Tea guest is Caly Williams, Brooklyn-based James Beard Award-winning photographer. Caly has been capturing and helping tell stories about food, hospitality, and the people and places that define our culture for more than 15 years. His work has appeared in the pages of Food and Wine, The New York Times, Bloomberg, and Travel and Leisure, as well as in cookbooks by Chef Kwame Onwuachi and Atlanta chef Todd Richards. Let's hear what Caly's most excited about and looking forward to this week.
I feel like we're in we've been saying this for years now, but a new stage of, yes, post-pandemic, but also just a new stage of where we are in thinking about food and hospitality. I think that people are much more interested in exploring their own personal stories in ways that weren't always available before. We're talking the other day, I was in Philly. I just got back from Philly and I spent just the weekend there. I have family there, and I've been traveling down to Philly for 20 odd years. And as I sort of transitioned into covering food and drink, and both as a photographer, as a writer sometimes, and just generally as an eater, I've observed the way that community has changed. This weekend, I managed to stop in at Honeysuckle, Omar Tate's and Sybil Sanad Tate's place in West Philly. And, I've been a fan of both of them for years, and I love what they're doing. I love that they're giving you not a restaurant experience, but really the supper club experience that, I remember from 15 years ago, a dozen years ago.
Easy.
It's a real expression of art and culture and history. It is not trying to be the same as other restaurants. It's a sort of cafe sandwich shop by day, but at night, the experience that's happening there, it was me and my wife at one table and a party of three at the other table. And that was it for the night. And, they're not doing cover. They're not counting covers. They're not turning tables. They are telling a story through food. And that's something we've talked about for a long time, but that's really the goal. That's what they're doing there, right? And they do it 4 nights a week. Friend and longtime fan of Michael Ferreri, who has a restaurant called Irwin's, Sicilian restaurant in South Philly. And, I got to catch up with him. They had a buyout, so I didn't get to actually go and eat there this time, but I'll be back next time. But, we got together and he was telling me a little bit about Salvatore's counter, which is a new feature that he's added. It is a sort of bespoke 4-seat counter experience that he says, he never does the same dish twice. He calls or emails the guests that are coming, asks them about their favorite food memories as children and all of this stuff. Irwin's was already a personal story for Michael. It was already him doing Sicilian food like his grandmother. It was already him reaching back through his family history. And now he's doing this counter experience because it's the next level of what he wants to do. He has a strong team that has the menu down, that is doing great work. Hervis is his CDC, and he and Hervis go to Sicily every year for research and to reconnect with the history and the cuisine and the space. They've got the restaurant down, and this is his way of exploring creatively new ways to do things. I think that people are now open to having those types of experiences as diners. And I think that, the folks in hospitality are ready to move beyond the survival mode that everyone's been in for so long and really go beyond where we were before. Because before in places like Philly, I just came from there, so this is why I'm thinking about Philly and not just talking about New York. Everyone talks about New York all the time. I love it. Let's stay on Philly. But Philly, for years, like the big thing there for a long time was trying to make it on the national scene by showing how fancy white tablecloth they could be. It was all super European. It was, French or exploring Italian in ways that I don't want to say is trying to be French, but is trying to show or prove that Italian can be fine dining in the same way, because it's coming from a different mindset 20 years ago when, 20, 30 years ago when folks like Mark Vetri were starting out, like Italian food didn't get the respect it gets now. And so like, there was very much this feeling like, okay, if we're going to make it on the national stage, the way we do it is by like being John George, right? By being as fancy as possible, as high end as possible. Historically, John George had a restaurant at the Ritz in Philly, way back when. And the idea was, okay, we're going to bring that attention back by like outdoing like the history of John George. And then of course the thing is, when Philly got back on the, really made it to the point of being on the national stage, John George just came back, right? I mean, he just came back. So like, you're not going to outdo John George, right? That was a fool's errand to begin with, right? Like the thing to do and the thing that put Philly on the map was not the brigade system. It was not being like trying to be as fancy and European as possible. It was, it was people like Alan Yin and, who had been putting in the work for 25, 30 years, who created community, who was there to support the people in the industry, in hospitality for all this time, right? It's people like Christina Martinez at South Philly Barbacoa, who was doing something unapologetic, right? She was never trying to quote unquote elevate barbacoa. She's like, barbacoa is good and I can make money selling this barbacoa just to the Mexicans here. And if everyone else wants to try it, then they can, but we're not adjusting anything, right? This is what it is. Cooking solo, like Mike Solomonoff and Steve Cook, like, they were an early stage of being high end without being fancy, right? They were never, the story I've heard about the kitchens that those guys run have never been about like yelling or, bad behavior or strictly sticking to regime structure or anything like that. It's been about, it's about creativity. It's about history. It's about culture, right? And, and I think that more and more, I mean, this has been a process getting to this place, but like more and more, that's what people are interested in on both sides. Chad and Hannah Williams from Friday, Saturday, Sunday, people sort of underestimated them because, it was a neighborhood restaurant that like could never take the roast chicken off of the menu because it's the thing that everyone knew the predecessor for doing, right? Like it was just the one dish. And I mean, it's amazing. It's a great chicken, but like everyone's like, oh yeah, that's just your, that's a corner spot, a neighborhood spot, right? But like they built a world-class restaurant out of it, and they keep the neighborhood aspect downstairs at the bar. People come in. Every time I go, I run into something, and they have this amazing tasting menu upstairs, right? And Chad's pedigree working in some of the finest restaurants in Philly and in New York, he's able to channel both of those things, right? The comfort, that vibe of having a special occasion dinner, but also being able to just know you come to the bar and you're gonna have that amazing octopus and beans dish, with a cocktail, like on any given Friday, right? And run into some people and talk over like amazing cocktails in this space that he and Hannah and Paul McDonald, their beverage director, have put together, right? It's just a comforting experience, but comforting doesn't have to be like we've had this idea for a long time that comfort doesn't have to be high end or isn't high end, and it's like you can have both.
Easily.
But like that's not a formula, right? That's just something that they put together because that's who they are.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's people, I guess, understanding themselves and understanding their vision and what they ultimately want to bring to the world, and like you said, be unapologetically them. I love that, and when I see that, it's. I just had Rita Jamay on as a high tea episode, and as she was giving advice to chefs and restaurateurs, she was saying, like, really get rooted in who you are,
right,
and ultimately your vision for the space. And, because that vision can be influenced for better or for worse by culture, by colleagues, by a lot of different things. And so what I hear you saying is you're excited about people who are leaning into their own identity, their own voice, and creating things that I'm not sure as consumers we were necessarily, maybe we were asking for, but it's more so they're just being so authentically themselves that you find your community.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's really interesting. But you've been able to travel, Clay, to so many places, documented so many incredible people, been, in so many kitchens. And as I think about America and our mutual friend, Kayla and I talked about this. What about individuals who are these sort of dual culture individuals, or who maybe are still trying to find themselves or don't have that strong sense of identity because they're pulled in culturally so many different directions because they're American, but they're also...
Yeah, I listened to you guys talking about that and about, fusion as a bad word, right? But like, I think there's a big difference. I don't think fusion in and of itself is bad. I think that fusion as it was, which was usually a white chef with French training, discovering somebody else's cuisine and slapping it on top of the techniques they already did. And I mean, we went and we called that fusion, but like that's more stapled on, right? Like that's not infused, right? In any real sense of the word. I think that when you're talking about someone who comes from multiple cultures, someone who, eats different food at home and at school or out in the world or whatever, that's got influences, like real influences, coming from like how they grew up in the area they grew up in. It, I think that's real, and I think that is super personal, and I think that like it's an area that we're going to see a lot more of because we are, this like multicultural society. Whether people want it to be that way or not, that's where that's what we are here, right? And so, you're getting Vietnamese barbecue in Houston, or you've got like, Trinidadian food here in Brooklyn. That is, Trinidadian food is already an amalgamation of food from
100%
from Africa, from the indigenous folks, from
India as well. A lot of influences.
Exactly.
From India.
My family's Jamaican. Yeah. We didn't just make up curry, right? That came from somewhere. Our national dish is ackee and saltfish is Norwegian cod. Like it was imported, right? It is imported. It's still imported. And some of that, it's like, okay, that's not what you would call sustainable. You're on an island surrounded by fish, and your national dish you're bringing in from somewhere else, but that's how culture works, right? And you wouldn't call that fusion, but that's just Jamaican food, right? That's just Trinidadian food. It's just what it is. I'm going to Peru in a couple of months, and Peru is famous for having, a blend of cultural influences between the indigenous, between the Chinese, the Japanese, the Spanish influences, and that's natural. I think the idea that there was ever a single authentic answer to anything was kind of always bullshit. And that there's only one right way to do something, like that's not true. And as we start to think of food as expressions of individuality, of culture, of any of that, then yeah, it makes more sense as being like, this is my expression of these foods that I grew up with, right? I think that's a problem when you have, there's the whole appropriation conversation that happened for years. And the issue for me, the issue was never about cooking someone else's food. It was cooking someone else's food and claiming you're an expert over the people who created it, right? Like, and having the privilege of getting paid more for it, right? Because you're quote unquote elevating something that, came from somebody else. I hope that we've moved on to a space where we're not talking about single things as being quote unquote real or authentic, and more as these are expressions of identity, of history, of culture, of surroundings.
As we're talking about people embracing, kind of their identity and finding themselves, and then ultimately coming up with a concept that is uniquely authentic to them and building a community around it. How do you think about capturing that content? And how do you think about capturing that essence of what they are doing? Because that's essentially then, not everyone gets to experience their art, but through your medium, a lot of people can discover it.
Right. My approach to photography has always been to sort of sit back and let the person be who they are. Right. I don't, a lot of photographers have different styles, and they can be a little bit they can impose that a little bit on the work they're doing. I think for me, I want to engage with my subjects on their own terms. I want them to be what the photos are about, what the stories are about. It's not my discovery of them or my impressions of them. It is, it's as much as I can. I want to let them do the talking. I want to let them be who they are, and not let, the camera get in the way of that.
So are you operating kind of in the background and saying don't even think that I'm here? I'm sure for certain things like a cookbook, right, you have specific directives, but as you're, in the back of a caravan, or you're going through Louisiana, or you're in Peru, right, you said, that's more of really just being an observer and you through the camera capturing the essence of what you're experiencing. Yeah, exactly.
I like to be as candid as possible. I like to let people be who they are. I actually, when it's just me and the person, I don't want to just be invisible. I want to have a conversation with them. I want to let them sort of be who they are, right? In a way that that brings that out. I always want to try to be a fly on the wall. When I'm in someone's kitchen, I want them to do what they're going to do. I'm a big guy. You're always going to notice that I'm there, but I want them to understand that I know what I'm not going to make this about me being there. Right. I want it to be about what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of how I approach any kitchen I'm in, anyone I'm working with, is I try to, I want it to be about who they are and what they're doing, and not about making something for the camera. Because to me, that sort of the love and the work they put in should stand on its own. It doesn't need to be
fabricated
exactly.
In any way. No, I love that. Clay, how do people best connect with you?
Social media, right? This is all we've got. So
we're in a social media age.
Yeah. I am Ultra Clay on Instagram and Threads, and I don't know, whatever else comes up. Otherwise, I am on my website. It's claywilliamsphoto.com. So yeah, that's the best way to find me and my work.
Awesome, man. Thanks so much for being a part of our community. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
On the Pass is hosted and produced by me, Gabriel Ornelas, and edited and mixed by Dylan Agajanian, with original music by Dylan Agajanian.